This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under 18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 548 for February 18th, 2018. Coming up on today's show, using science to hack your love life with Brenda Wiebe. That's coming up on today's show. Hey everybody, it's your host Minx, and we've got some good stuff for you today. Pretty excited about it. I will mention one thing. Well, actually, I'm going to mention a lot more than one thing before we get into the interview. But while I'm thinking about it, in the interview where we talk with Brenda Wiebe about her new book, Catch and Release, How I Use Science to Hack My Love Life, she mentions that it's coming out soon. Well, it is out. It came out on February 12th. This show should drop on February 18th. So guess what? You don't even have to wait to read her book. You can go out and get it like right this second, like right now. Probably want to do that. Link to do that is, as always, in the show notes, which you can find in your app if you're listening through an app, or you can go to our website, polyweekly.com, and get the show notes from pretty much any episode ever. Something else I wanted to mention to you. Do you folks remember Kitty Chambliss? We brought her on the show to talk about her book on jealousy, and Lusty Guy and I had actually met her at RelateCon in Boise. But she is actually working on putting together a podcast of her own. Loving Without Boundaries is creating a podcast about alternative relationships and polyamory. And you know what? The more podcasts, the merrier. I want to see my Apple Podcast queue full of poly podcasts. And she is setting up a Patreon so she can do that. Very smart. Patreon didn't exist when I started, or I would have done it. But it's very cool. So I encourage you, if you want to hear another podcast about polyamory, or if you're just, sick of hearing my voice, you can contribute to her. Basically, you subscribe and give a certain amount to her each month to support her craft and her art. And then in return, you get all kinds of fabulous rewards, like, let's see. All patrons immediately have access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content she posts regularly on their Patreon page. $3 plus patrons immediately have access to fun interviewee sex questions and her jealousy survival guidebook and a free coaching call and some awesome, she actually gives you stuff for your donations, unlike me. So, hey, let's support another awesome sex positive educator. I'll provide the link in the show notes. I tweeted about this and posted to the Polyweekly Facebook page when it first came out. So I love NPR podcasts. I listen to a lot of independent podcasters, but I also do really love my NPR podcast queue. Got my This American Life and my Radio Lab and Freakonomics and How I Built This, and Hidden Brain, which is a podcast about social science experiments and reports. And they recently did an episode on marriage entitled, When Did Marriage Become So Hard? And holy shit, all of the stuff in the episode are the things that we say all the time. It was really interesting. They start off by talking about what traditional marriage actually was, and this idea that everybody has today about traditional marriage really started in the 60s and 70s. How we got to the current expectations for marriage. Note, it wasn't always supposed to be true love and expected to enhance your personal growth and happiness. But then they also bring on experts to talk about things that make for a good marriage, which basically amount to things like owning your shit and assuming goodwill all around. And they even bring on a guy who's written a book recently, and he not only talked about what we call owning your shit and assuming goodwill all around, but also talked about consensual non-monogamy. I mean, they didn't say polyamory, but consensual non-monogamy, pretty much the same thing. And this is on an NPR podcast, and it wasn't even a weird, crazy thing. It was just hey, some people do this and this is a good way to make this work, because he does talk about the fact that it is unhealthy. It's generally perceived to be unhealthy to expect to get all your social needs met from one person. And he even pointed out that people that are in happier marriages tend to have several different people that they go to fill their emotional and social needs. Like you have a buddy you go golfing with, and maybe you have someone that you talk philosophy with. And that there are different people that you turn to in your life to share and nurture different parts of yourself. And that is generally the health that generally represents the healthiest marriages. I am so excited. I really feel like, you know what? Maybe I should just shut down the podcast because my work here is done. We are mainstream. We are hitting the mainstream, and we are hitting it hard. Speaking of which, there is another article that came out on Valentine's Day called How a Polyamorous Dad Balances Parenting and Multiple Partners. A listener sent me this link. It's in an online publication called Fatherly from fatherly.com. And it is a personal essay of a guy who lives in a quad type cohabitational relationship where there are multiple kids, and he is a vampire LARPer. I'm like, yeah, big surprise. How many vampire LARPers have I dated? Okay, well, maybe just one or two, but still not uncommon in the poly community. And it's just basically written as a nice profile of a nice, very functional, smart family. And then from our Poly in the News blog, Alan recently wrote an article on polyamory in Iceland. Now, I've been to Iceland. There are only about 300,000 people in the entire country. In fact, when we were there, we were talking to people about dating. And basically, the philosophy seems to be that, look, it's a small country. It's not so much dating as you end up hanging around with someone a lot. And basically, once you fuck them enough times, you're like, yeah, okay, well, we'll get married. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's very casual. It's not like it is in other countries. But this is an article by Alice Demertis, who wrote in the Reykjavik Grapevine about the fact that there are now not one, but two Facebook groups dedicated to polyamory in Iceland. Iceland! This is great. This is like the entire country is half the size of Seattle, and there are already 2 Facebook groups. I mean, they're not huge. They're like 100 and 200 people, but still. I am thrilled that Lusty Guy was able to join me for this wonderful interview with Brenda Wiebe, author of Catch and Release: How I Used Science to Hack My Love Life. And I am so excited to have in the Poly Weekly studios for the very first time, Brenda Wiebe. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome, Brenda.
Thanks.
And oh, look, there's another voice. That's our co-host, Lusty Guy.
That's right. It feels so weird, though, because we're in separate rooms of the studio, the Poly Weekly studios. We're in separate rooms of the place, and so I can't see you and whatnot while we're doing this. It's strange.
It's because I'm not a good enough audio engineer to figure out how to do that and have it sound good.
Yeah, me either.
So.
The two of us can't figure it out. We've been trying.
Yes. Well, Brenda, this is your first time on the show, and it's because you do have a book out, which is entitled Catch and Release: How I Use Science to Hack My Love Life, which nerds like me are so excited to hear about.
Thanks. I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm interested to see what other people think about it now.
For those who do not know you and how fabulous you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
And the book.
So I am a big nerd. I have 2 master's degrees, one in sociology and one in anthropology, which I think is some of the driving force behind why I wanted to write this book. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, with my partner and his cat. I am a social worker. I also love fantasy books and like to go hiking. But yeah, the book is a sort of like a literature review of some of the prominent scientific research on relationships. I cover a little bit of the history of monogamy and how it came to be and why we're doing it now. And I also share some of my own stories. And I did that because I think it's pretty much impossible to write about something like love completely objectively. And so I wanted to be really open about my biases as I was interpreting things. So my story's in there too.
I gotta say, your little asides and your personal notes and stories are part of what makes the book so wonderful. Did you, before you did that, when you made that choice to interweave your own story there, did you wrestle with the questions of how honest to be and how many details to reveal? And did you get the permission of your lovers to be included in the story?
I did not. I have not talked to, well, one of them I did. My very first boyfriend, he and I are still on speaking terms, so he knows he's in there, but I have not talked to my ex-husband, who's a major character, or I call him my rebound boyfriend. And I did change their names, of course, but I did not talk to them about it.
Well, it's your story too. You get to tell your story. I could see that line, but I was really wondering about that. And I have to say, the willingness to reveal the stories in which your behavior might not be something that someone would want to cop to is really neat and refreshing in the book. I really enjoyed it. In particular, the story, I'm not going to give anything away. I hate book reviews that are all about plot and what happened. But the one where the punchline is, yeah, I don't understand me either.
Oh.
That made me laugh. I don't get me either. That was beautiful.
Thank you. It's funny because the first draft that I wrote, my partner read it, and I was worried I was writing way too much about myself because, of course, to me, the science part's what's interesting. And he told me, no, the parts about you are what get people through the science parts. And I was like, well, I guess if that will get them through the science, I'll just keep telling more of my stories.
Well, I think you and I, we met at the Idaho show RelateCon last year. Mm-hmm. And we met, and it was funny because we did that standard conversation that often happens when poly people meet, what poly books do you like? And both of us immediately were like, yeah, whatever, Sex at Dawn. Let's talk about the stuff that came before Sex at Dawn. And that happens so rarely. I really appreciated it. And a lot of it was that hardcore science stuff. And I enjoyed the science stuff in your book, but your friend is right. I'm not right in that the personal stuff did not get me through the science stuff because I enjoyed that as well. But the personal stuff was really fun. In terms of the science, was there anything that you learned through the course of this book that really surprised you? That you went, wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, and I think you and I even talked about this last year. It's the book called The Myth of Monogamy, and there's this main way of looking at reproduction for a really long time, and it's to simplify it, it's males wanted to spread their sperm to as many females as possible, and then females wanted to grab onto a male to protect their offspring and have someone to provide them with resources. And so this idea of like the philandering male and then the female just trying to keep a man all to herself. And what happened recently with the advances of genetic research is that scientists found that a lot of females were actually being really sneaky on the side as well. Biologists just hadn't caught them doing it in nature. But once we had the genetic evidence, a lot of animals that were supposedly monogamous weren't. The females were just extra sneaky about it. And it's just something that I really loved and really started shifting my own ideas about monogamy. So that was a really fun little surprise.
That was a great revelation. I totally enjoyed reading The Myth of Monogamy and reading that. Like, I think the first example was birds that were touted as monogamous. We need to be like birds. And they look more closely and they're like, oh, those birds are cheating on their spouses left and right. I remember reading a story where the birds were like, the mates were walking together and then they parted and a bush came between them and they sort of walked around the bush. And like while they were on the bush, the woman had a couple little side extra pair couplings and then they met together and kept walking on the side of the bush. It was so quick that scientists hadn't caught it until then. I love that story.
I love it because it really shows how throughout most of the 20th century, science was still so influenced by religion. And so you had all of these scientists who were mostly upper class, white, religious males trying to find monogamy in nature to prove that, see, humans should be monogamous. See all of these animals doing it? And then it's like, nope, actually, we were wrong.
The shorthand, by the way, for that theory about how men and women ought to behave based on, it's hard to generate eggs and there's lots of sperm and men should philander and women should want to find someone to be monogamous with. The shorthand for that is the great egg theory. And the great egg theory in anthropology has taken lots of shots under the waterline in recent years with the advent of DNA technology. It was really neat to read about that in your book and to see you bring that in. I really appreciated that.
It was fun. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's funny because there is really this huge debate, especially with humans, where scientists are really, they get riled up about it, like trying to say that, oh, humans are monogamous and here's all the reasons why, and then being able to kind of piece through that. And the way I did it in my book is I tried to present all of the different sides and then kind of explain why I thought one was better than the other. And so I do talk about, I mean, there is good research out there. There's good scientists who think that humans are monogamous and they have their reasons why. And I think this is something, there's a reason why people who are maybe of the more conservative nature just think science is wrong, because you have scientists who disagree so vehemently. And I hope that in my book, I was able to kind of show, like, here are all these different sides and the research is good on both sides. And often they're using the exact same data and just interpreting it differently and hoping people can come to their own conclusions based on the data that I review.
Yeah, people don't understand that science is just an ongoing argument.
Right.
The question is just the level of detail of the argument. Everybody gets that, what's his name? Newton's basic theories explains macro movement of gravity within certain ranges of error, but they still argue about the existence of waves, right? Gravity waves. Mm-hmm. And was that detected and was it not? That's the nature of science. There will always be arguments. The question is just at what level of detail. And there comes a point where the arguments are not relevant to the decision making from day-to-day activities. We don't argue anymore about the level of theory needed to make sure that your monitor works for your computer, for example.
Right.
But I did want to circle back to another really neat thing about your book that I'm happy whenever I see it in the discussion of evolution, and probably because of your background, which is a really subtle difference in the notion of evolution. We think about evolution as survival of the fittest. That's the thing that everybody says. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that you point out is that having offspring doesn't do any good unless those offspring survive themselves.
Exactly. My teachers always would say over and over again, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most reproductively fit. And what is beneficial in one time and place for a species is not going to be later, which is why we have extinctions. And I think with humans, it gets really interesting because it even goes a step further because we introduce culture into the mix. And so the cultural pressures that we're facing now are so different than before that, it's something that people don't think about. And it's really interesting to think about.
And in the same way that notion adds a little subtle spin to your understanding of evolution. Another one that I bumped into that I really like is to think of evolution not so much as survival of the fittest as it is death of the weakest.
Yeah.
and that distinction actually is important. It matters.
Yeah.
But so was this helpful for you? Did doing this scientific research and opening your head up to this way of looking at it, did it actually make a positive difference in your dating life, and how so?
I want to just briefly go into my, poly origin story because this ties exactly into your question. Before I started writing my book, I was married, and it was a mostly monogamous marriage. We did some swinging towards the end, but when my marriage ended, I sort of saw it as this failed test. And at the time, I thought that I was on a time crunch. I was 29, and I was like, I have barely enough time to, meet someone new, date for a while, get married, and have kids by my mid-30s, because at that time, that was very much my life plan. And so because I'm such a nerd and so academic, my solution was to do a bunch of research so that I could essentially pass the test the next time. And then without giving away too many spoilers, I had a rebound boyfriend who I kind of thought would be, the next one. And then that ended. And that's it was just kind of strange timing because that's when I read Myth of Monogamy right after our breakup. Right after that is when I started actually finding sex-positive relationship books, because before that, the relationship books I was reading and finding were mostly just really annoying me because they were so they were just so slut shaming. It's like, make the guy chase you, don't have sex on the first date. And it was maddening. And so I think it was this like perfect storm of reading Myth of Monogamy. And I am so scientifically minded, like being able to see that from my research that no, humans are not naturally monogamous. It's not some natural state of being that makes us happier versus other types of relationships. And so seeing that there was plenty of scientific research for that, and then actually finding sex positive books that kind of explained ethical non-monogamy, it was just this fit. Like I had been trying to force myself to do monogamy and relationships one way. And then when I started doing ethical non-monogamy and having all of these tools to really be able to do it as, as right as you can on your first try, I feel like my dating relationships have been so much better.
Okay, I want to back up for just a second because I did catch the part where you said you started writing this book when you were in a monogamous relationship and now you're no longer in that relationship. And I'm assuming you self-identify as poly now. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Why did you start writing a relationship book when you were in an unhappy monogamous relationship, or what sounds like was unhappy?
So it was right after, actually one part in my book, I think I have it as the foreword. They're set up as journal entries in the book, and that one's dated 4 years ago. So you can look at the timeline. That's the only piece I wrote while I was still in that relationship. But I actually, yeah, it's kind of fun.
I love it. Your relationship is the foreword to a book.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. What a slap in the face.
Anybody who dates a writer has to understand that they're going to end up being written about. It's just how it works.
And so it was right after we separated and right around the time we divorced that I started writing the book. And it's funny because when I first started writing it, I had this idea of writing this book about like dating in your 30s and it being this fun thing. It's something that didn't have to be awful because part of the reason I stayed married as long as I did is I had all of these friends who were telling me, you don't want to be single in your 30s. Men are really intimidated by smart women. It's awful out here. And so I was like, well, if I get divorced, I may never find love again. Maybe I should stick it out. But in the end, it wasn't working. And so I did get divorced, and I actually had a lot of fun dating right afterwards. Online dating was new to me, and it was like a candy store. I was going on like 3 days a day for a little while.
Wait, 3 a day, not 3 a week?
I think I only did that like 1 week. Maybe it was 2. I was really excited to be dating again. But that's when I started writing the book. I like I said, I thought of my first relationship as a failed one. So I was reading all of these books and reading all of these journal articles, and I thought I might as well write it down and maybe expedite the process for the next person who wanted to have science help them figure out their relationships.
I got to say, to circle back to this guy's being intimidated by intelligent women, boy, I hope that's true. I know there's stuff that reports it because there's always people that's not true for. Makes everybody will tell you that I like intelligent women. So the more guys that take themselves out of the pool, the better and happier I am.
I had that exact same thought that, I'm sure that's true for some guys, but you know what? Fuck them. It just makes it a quicker no.
I know, right?
I back even in the days when I worked, I've never forgotten this. When I worked in the strip clubs, and then I would go do parties with this guy, big, well-built black guy named Elvin, kind of a mentor. He really taught me a lot. And one time he and I were talking about smart women, and he was like, "Well, what are you going to do when the sex is over? Say, what do you want to watch on TV? You got to have someone you can talk with." And I was like, "Oh my God, of course. That's." Yeah. So I've never forgot that. What are you going to do when the sex is over? Watch TV? Which is okay. I mean, watching TV's fine. Don't get me wrong at times. But anyway,
you're saying that because I really like to watch TV.
It's true. A little bit of ass cover in there. I think everybody will understand. So anyway, you have found something that you could bring from the world of science into your personal life and improve your relationship dating experience. Is that right?
Yeah, I really think so. Like I said, for some reason, just because of the way my brain works, that is what really made ethical non-monogamy and polyamory click for me. And yeah, I'm really happy I went through the process. I think I even say it at the very beginning. I wrote a little piece, like right before I sent it to my publisher, and I say in there, the book has a surprise ending, even for me, because honestly, the end of my marriage, we did some swinging, and I did not know that resources existed to help you to keep from completely fucking that up. And so I think we did exactly everything wrong that you could do. And so it went pretty badly.
Everybody. You know,
Welcome to the club.
Nobody does it right the first time. It's so funny. Think about it, right? How many people got their first dating experience right? How many people went out in the monogamous world and said, hey, I'm going to try dating you, and everything went great? No. None of us are even clever enough, really, to watch the mistakes everybody else makes and not to do it. No, we got to go out and do it. This is how it is. So there you go.
Yeah, so right after that, I was like, there's no way that I would want to do that. And then after realizing, well, actually, there were some parts that I really liked about it. Like, you know, a year or two later, once I just got over the hard parts of the divorce and the separation, you can just see everything so much clearer. And so I realized that there were parts of it that I really liked. And even just looking past in my life in general, it's just, I mean, when I was 7, I had 2 boyfriends at the same time. And so if I look at like my dating experience and life as a whole, non-monogamy suits me much better. But yeah, I say at the beginning that my book had a surprise ending, because when I first started it, I was kind of expecting to, just start over, find someone else to marry and have kids with. And now it's crazy because I don't even know if I want kids. And I've just found this whole other life that I guess I didn't know was an option. And now that I have it, I'm just like so glad that I did have that terrible divorce and then get to end up where I am now. And I'm just so happy and thrilled with my life.
Okay, so now as we record this, your book has not yet been released, but it will have been released afterwards. And I want to do a little imagination game here, because we know it's going to be a huge hit. You're going to have all kinds of fans. You're going to be doing the circuit at the shows, and people are going to be coming buying your book and having you autograph it. What is it you really hope somebody comes up to you and says, hey, you know, I read the book, I loved it, and blank. What's that blank for you? What are you hoping someone tells you?
In my ideal world, someone would come up to me, and I guess in this hypothetical situation, they hadn't found all of the other great books out there already on polyamory, and they say to me, hey, I read your book. I never really thought about or knew that there were other ways of doing relationships, and this really has helped me and given me ideas and hope that maybe I can have relationships that are more what I want.
Cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I hope that happens. Just so you know, when I was in reading where I've done through and did this little exercise with me coming up to you after the book, I was like, wow, that's a really great book. Can I take you to dinner? So I'm glad you guys are going to be up here next weekend, and I can take you to dinner and tell you how much I appreciated the book and liked meeting you through it. One of the really cool things about this book, and I really hope people get this message and understand, is that because of the inclusion of those journal entries, and specifically the transformation of the character of Brenda over the course of those journal entries, you really feel like you get a feeling for the author in a way that isn't true in a lot of those books that are more scientific recitations of the studies and the conclusions and the behavioral examples and things. And that was really fun. I felt like I got to meet Brenda, and I liked Brenda through the course of the book.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, because I love writing, and in school, your writing has to be so dry. It has to be like painfully dry. And so getting to write a book that had the science and could still have fun, sexy bits and sarcasm, that was just wonderful for me.
I like it's science and sexy. Two mints in one.
Well, you know, science is pretty sexy as far as I'm concerned, but we know I've kind of got a communication fetish, so.
Brenda, it has been so much fun to chat with you. I can't believe our time is almost up. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and where they can find your book?
So I have a website. It's called nonmonogblog.com. And that's the easiest way to find all of my other social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Those are at BL Wiebe. And so it's just hard to spell my name. So that's why I start with nonmonogblog, but it's BLWIEBE. So that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Thank you. First of all, congratulations on birthing your baby, otherwise known as the book. And thank you so much for talking with us about it. That's very exciting.
Thank you for having me.
Well, yes, indeed. Thank you for being on the show and for writing the book. It was really just a pleasure to read, and I encourage everybody to get multiple copies of it.
And thanks again to Brenda for that fabulous interview. And thanks to Lusty Guy for doing the work to actually read the book. You can tell that I did not read the book in its entirety. Lusty Guy did. And so we had a lot of fun with the interview. And by the way, that book is out and available now on Amazon or through her website. It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by Fubbly Polyamorists everywhere. Our Happy Poly Moment this week is from Nancy in Cleveland, who wrote about a series of You Are Not Alone moments. This makes me very happy. She writes, last April, several people were lamenting on a local Facebook poly group about feeling isolated and lacking a sense of community. And we were all thinking it's because ethical non-monogamy is pretty rare in the Midwest. Okay, I was in Chicago. That is not true. So I suggested that a few of us actually try getting together and meeting in person. At least we'd have a small group. Then, to our surprise, 12 people showed up to a small casual lunch. We figured that if we were wanting this community support network, others would be too, and we decided to form a meetup group, Poly Cleveland, again expecting it to be small. Well, talk about untapped opportunity. In the 9 months since then, we've grown to over 300 members. We hold one regular event per week, board game night, discussion group, coffee chat, poly book club, and we schedule occasional one-off events such as tobogganing and poly movie and web series viewing parties. The success and warmth of the group has grown far beyond my expectations. At every event, at least one person thanks a facilitator for putting this group together or for creating a space to talk openly and to be heard, respected, and supported. It's really rewarding to see people make new connections and share their stories. It truly is a community now, and I just can't be happier. So that's my Happy Poly moment. For anyone who wants to start their own group, my best advice is to keep the focus on building community and not on dating. The dating will happen on its own. Well, that is fantastic. And that's absolutely true. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story. Somebody gets tired of feeling disconnected or feeling like the online experience isn't fulfilling enough. They decide to do a meetup and they're overwhelmed by the number of people that show up. It's not just you. Everyone is just waiting for someone to take that first step. So why shouldn't that first step be you? It doesn't have to be all you. If you just get a community of volunteers that will help to put events together, you too can be a community organizer and help a lot of people. I got to tell you, it feels really great to help people feel better about themselves and about their relationship structures and the choices they are making in life. Because a lot of people are telling them that these are the wrong choices, that what they're doing is wrong, or even that it's not a choice, right? That it is something that is inherently wrong with them. And you can really make a difference in somebody's life. It's a pretty awesome feeling, I will tell you. Well, I think that about wraps it up for today's show. Thanks to Lusty Guy for helping with our interview host. Thanks for the lovely Brenda Wiebe for writing a fabulous book. And thanks to you for writing and calling in and telling me your stories. We are a free resource. We help hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and success with polyamory every week. We don't have a Patreon, but you can subscribe the old-fashioned way by going to our website, polyweekly.com, scroll down to the bottom, and you can join as a Poly Weekly Playmate. We don't give you all sorts of fabulous prizes, but you do get the satisfaction of knowing that you are supporting a podcast that does help others to feel less alone in the world. Questions, comments, or feedback? Email polyweekly@gmail.com. Call 802-505-POLY. And you can always find us at facebook.com/polyweekly, or on Twitter @polyweekly or @cunningminx, and other places around the web by searching for Polyamory Weekly. Thanks for listening, and remember, it's not all about the sex.